The battlefield was silent, but not peaceful. Ravens gathered where the wind still smelled of iron and ash. The sea beyond was red in the sunrise, carrying the cries of those who could not die yet. When the swords were sheathed and the shouting ceased, another ritual began, one the sagas rarely describe. The victors moved among the fallen, not to mourn, but to sort the living from the dead, to decide who would vanish, who would serve, and who would pay the gods in pain. For the Vikings, conquest did not end with the clash of weapons. It began in the eerie calm after, when law, vengeance, and belief collided in the smoke of the slain god. In the Viking world, battle was only half the story. The Norse believed victory was not complete until the gods had been honored, and the social order restored, through reward, punishment, and possession. Prisoners were not merely captives. They were currency, sacrifice, or symbols. Wives and witnesses carried the burden of survival, navigating a code that mixed mercy with terror. The line between sacred duty and brutality was as thin as a sword-edged dot. By the end of this chronicle, you will see how the aftermath of Viking warfare, the treatment of the defeated, the rituals of ownership, the silence of the witnesses, reveals the true spine of their civilization. Beneath the sagas of glory lies a world of ritualized cruelty, desperate faith, and dark justice. When the fighting ended, the victors began what they called after work, the grim labor of sorting souls. Men of rank were separated from commoners. Warriors who resisted to the end were granted what the Norse called a worthy death, their bodies arranged with weapons for the afterlife. But those who surrendered, or were captured alive, entered a liminal state between life and death. The sagas rarely describe it directly, but fragments survive in Icelandic law codes and poetic allusions. Captives could be enslaved, ransomed, or offered to the gods. In every case, their fate reinforced power. Slavery was not shameful to the Norse elite. It was proof of dominion. The captured became thralls, property by divine right. Yet some were marked for sacrifice, bound to honor fallen chieftains or to consecrate new ships. The execution of these rites followed strict symbolism. A chieftain might order captives buried beneath his outposts, believing their spirits would strengthen the beams. Archaeologists have found bones beneath Viking foundations, silent witnesses to this theology of dominance. For the women of the conquered, survival depended on ritualized incorporation into the victor's world. Marriage, concubinage, servitude, all blurred into one. Some were claimed by warriors, others given to temples or sold across the sea. Yet in the Norse mind, this was not mere cruelty. It was the restoration of order. To conquer was to own, and to own was to sustain life and lineage. Still, beneath the chants and songs of triumph, fear lingered. The skalds tell of omens after battle, fires that would not die, ships that drifted without crew, dreams of those left unburied. Even victors feared the vengeance of the restless dead. And so, the post-battle rites, equal parts devotion and dread, were designed to appease them. Who decided where salvation ended and vengeance began? As the smoke cleared from a raid, the victors turned to ceremony. They cleansed their weapons in seawater, then smeared ash upon their faces to honor the dead. The battlefield was sacred space now, an altar of destiny. Chroniclers later wrote that the Norse saw blood not as horror, but as sanctification. It returned power to the gods who granted victory. For prisoners, the next days decided everything. Ransom was a pragmatic art. Wealthy captives could purchase life through silver or kinship networks stretching across Europe. The sagas recount how kings negotiated the release of nobles, while nameless men were chained to labor in Icelandic fields or Dublin markets. Every slave was a fragment of memory, a story broken into silence. The wives of fallen warriors faced a different ritual. In the early centuries, Scandinavian custom dictated that high-ranking widows oversee funerary rites. The burning of ships, the distribution of possessions, the final feast. But among the whispers of these ceremonies lingered darker echoes. Accounts from Arab travelers such as Ahmad ibn Fadlan described the ship funeral, a ritual where the death of a chieftain demanded not only treasure, but human companionship into the afterlife. A woman, sometimes a servant or concubine, was said to volunteer or be chosen to join him in death. Whether myth or memory, such stories haunted Europe for centuries, shaping the image of Norse savagery. Yet not all wives were victims. Some wielded authority over the redistribution of prisoners, the taking of spoils, even over life and death. In sagas like Laxdilla and Untold saga, widowed women act as arbiters of vengeance, keeping the moral balance through cunning and blood debt. The Norse world revered power, even when wielded by those it silenced. The witnesses, monks, merchants, villagers who saw these rituals carried the tales home, and with them spread both terror and fascination. To the Christian chronicler, the Norse were demons in human form. To the peasants of the north, they were fate itself, the living embodiment of divine will. But within their own ranks, Even Vikings fear the curse of the innocent. The sagas speak of those who killed the unarmed, only to find themselves haunted by Draugr, revenants drawn from their guilt. Thus, every conquest required purification, every survivor became a moral mirror. Could a society built on violence also believe in justice? The darkest truths of Viking conquest emerged not from sagas, but from graves. Across Scandinavia, archaeologists have uncovered burial mounds containing both warriors and captives, men and women interred together, some bound, some free. These were not mass graves of chaos but structured deposits, ritual intentional, designed to speak to the gods. In such burials, power survived beyond death. The chieftain who commanded the raid became a semi-divine ancestor. Those buried with him were not remembered as individuals. They became his retinue in eternity. To the Norse, the afterlife mirrored the hall, hierarchy, loyalty, and perpetual feasting. The cruelty of this belief lay not in the violence itself, but in its justification. Every act, no matter how merciless, was sanctified as cosmic order. Meanwhile, the surviving captives lived lives marked by silence. The Norse word for slave, thrall, shared roots with thrall, to be enthralled, bound not only by chains but by speechlessness. They built the farms, raised the children, served the feast. Their names erased from records, but their labor immortalized in prosperity. When Christianity reached the north, missionaries condemned this bondage, yet quietly bought slaves themselves. Moral reform came slow, and only after profit. The wives, too, bore invisible chains. Saga literature idealized them as stoic and wise, yet their power existed only in proximity to the men who died. After each raid, marriages were rearranged to seal alliances, creating a constant cycle of exchange. Women were the currency of peace, as captives were of war. Yet within that confinement, some carved space for defiance. The vulva, the seeress, stood apart, feared and revered. She could curse kings, halt storms, summon visions. Even hardened warriors bowed before her. It was through such women that the Norse confronted the moral contradictions of conquest. The vulva reminded them that every victory demanded payment, and that no one, not even the gods, escaped consequence. Here lies the darkest revelation. In the Viking world, cruelty was not madness. It was order. To survive, one had to accept that the universe itself was built on sacrifice. As the centuries turned and Christianity spread through the north, the rituals of conquest began to change, but not disappear. Baptism replaced sacrifice. Oaths replaced blood. Yet the old logic persisted. Power still required submission. Wealth still required suffering. The old gods faded, but their shadow remained. The memory of Viking brutality became legend, both feared and admired. Medieval poets romanticized the raiders as symbols of freedom, while clerics painted them as agents of apocalypse. But behind both myths was a single truth. Europe had been shaped by those who believed domination was destiny. Archaeological sites across Scandinavia and Britain whisper of this duality. Altars beside Christian crosses, slave chains buried beneath church floors, runestones carved beside graves of priests. The conquerors had become converts, yet the old hunger never truly died. For the descendants of both victors and victims, the silence speaks louder than the sagas. Every plundered chalice, every surviving heirloom, carries the echo of those who vanished unnamed. Their suffering became invisible currency, their endurance the foundation of nations. In the end, the Viking Age was not extinguished by swords, but by stories, by the slow rewriting of horror into heroism. And so the line between myth and memory blurred, leaving us to wonder, did they truly conquer the world, or merely teach it how to worship power? In the quiet after battle, when the ships had sailed and the fires cooled, what remained was not glory, but consequence. The Vikings mastered war, but their true legacy lay in what came after, the making and unmaking of human worth. Their gods demanded courage. Their world demanded obedience. Between the two, mercy found no home. Next time, we open another sealed chapter, the monks who sold relics of the dead, the black market of holiness.